family, or intimacy, for instance, as a source of hope and loss and regret and pain. Richard is particularly deft at showing how familial joy and hope is the shining underbelly of the horror. For him, horror has a more intense affect if it's the inevitable extension of heartbreak, guilt, and blame. For Richard, horror is something that clings to human connection and feeds on it as it dies. What makes these stories resonate for me is that they pry up the loose floorboards of my own fears, particularly the very personal ones, the ones that truly haunt me. These are fears that are deep-seated, almost foundational, because they're so personal. Such fears raise the specter of failure, of my failing those who I'm closest to, of failing myself as well, of failing to be the self I've convinced myself and the world that I am. For many of Richard's characters, it's too late. They were right to be afraid, because their world has already collapsed. For others, the sense of impending collapse, their sense, right or wrong, of the inevitability of it, is often enough to drive them away from the very things that give them solace. Sometimes they are so afraid they will destroy what they love that they flee from it in advance, cut themselves off. That, for me, is much more terrifying than the usual horror tropes, such as, say, things that go bump in the night, or scary clowns. All right, I admit it, I'm also afraid of things that go bump in the night and also scary clowns, and especially scary clowns that go bump in the night. And it'd be remiss of me not to mention that Richard does have 2 scary clown stories in here, but they're different sorts of clown stories than we're used to. One, for instance, puts us in very close proximity to the clown, to his dark and churning mind, and then leaves us there in anticipation of what he is likely to do. The story stops as the darkness within his head prepares to spill out. The other I'll leave you to discover on your own. Richard opens the collection with a story entitled Repent, in which a crooked cop seems to be undergoing a sort of failed atonement. It seems petty now, says the narrator, looking back, the ways I boiled over, the ways I was betrayed. Indeed it does, once we discover the deal he has made, and what he had to sacrifice to make it. There's a way of telling this story that's all plot, but Richard is much more interested in the character's affect, in the emotional damage the narrator is still undergoing, in how this loss makes him feel, and in what, by proxy, this loss can make us feel. Dwelling places are often isolated in Richard's fiction and shot through with heat. Characters are lonely or alone, either literally or metaphysically. The whole world is permeated with loss and regret. Characters are haunted by what they've done, or in advance by what they might do. Rage is often bubbling up, threatening to erupt. There are memory gaps, holes. People struggle to remember who they are, experience disorientation from their own bodies, if it really is their own body. As one narrator suggests at the beginning of Notice Tullins, I've been trying to find myself for what seems my whole life. Now a dark fate has found me instead. I've summoned something, drawn its gaze down upon me. This is how the suffering begins. Suffering, how it begins, how one becomes conscious, even hyper-conscious of the extent of it and where it leads, is at the heart of Richard's work. It makes his fiction as painfully tender as a bruise. Know thyself, counsels the Delphic maxim, but Richard recognizes that in the quest to know yourself, you're as likely to dig something else up, something that would be better left buried. And yet you can't stop yourself from digging. These stories are often voice-driven. The voices that drive them are abject, uncomfortable. You might hear some version of them coming out of the mouth of the homeless schizophrenic on the L if you took the time to listen and could understand what he said. Nightmares abound here. There's a story about the feeling of being trapped in a situation that